Valerie, I'm going to let people in, okay? Okay. Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us. We will be getting started shortly.
Okay, let's get started. The time is now 6:02. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday evening for this very important presentation on anti-Black racism in the education system with a special focus on post-secondary school. And this event is brought to you by the Canadian Multicultural Lead Organization for Mentoring Training, feature our special guest speaker today, Nadia Richards. We're so honored to have Nadia with us. Before we begin, we will have L.E.A.D, my colleague, will introduce herself, and I will also introduce myself, and then we will do our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Valerie. Yes, as Valerie mentioned, my name is L.E.A.D, and I will be one of the facilitators for the event. I'm also a program coordinator here at the L.E.A.D organization. And Valerie will also be co-facilitating with me. So before we get started, I'll start off with our land acknowledgement. As treaties people on Turtle Island, we are obligated to uphold treaties made from a long time ago. Where I am situated, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. I also want to thank the First Peoples for the ongoing teaching of how we are to learn on the land and from the land in partnership with each other, the animals, and the plants.
Thank you, L.E.A.D, for the land acknowledgement. And for everyone's information, this meeting is being recorded. We will be recording our workshops so that you have a chance to watch them afterwards on our YouTube channel. So a brief agenda for this evening is we'll let you know about the L.E.A.D organization. We'll lay down our ground rules and housekeeping norms, give an introduction to our special guest speaker, Nadia Richards, who will take over for the main event. There will also be time for Q&A, and we'll also let you know about the amazing upcoming events we'll be hosting at the L.E.A.D org. I'll pass it to my colleague, L.E.A.D, to talk about the L.E.A.D organization.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. So we are the Canadian Multicultural L.E.A.D organization, and our goal as an organization is to help youth and adults turn their challenges into opportunities through empowering them to build key skills that are founded on the four main principles of leadership, empowerment, achievement, and determination. So since 2007, the L.E.A.D program has been running the L.E.A.D program, which the goal of this program is to mentor high school students around the GTA area. And over the past 14 years, we've actually successfully mentored over 300 students. And currently, with the onset of the pandemic, we started expanding our audience to also reach, young adults as well, through hosting many of these events like you're here today. We also host financial workshops, mental health chats, and we have a lot of career development programs that we're also starting off very soon. And our mission statement is to give individuals from youth to seniors the support to develop strategies and tools to create their own success stories.
Amazing. Thank you, L.E.A.D, for sharing about the L.E.A.D organization. And now we'll lay down our ground rules, starting with L.E.A.D.
Mm-hmm. So we do, because of the sensitivity of the topic that we're going to be speaking on today, we ask everyone to be respectful of everyone's opinion. We ask you to be open, to hear everyone out and to also listen and also be helpful in your conversations as well.
Further, we ask that you be authentic. This is a space where you can share your experiences and to be present. So We would love to have your full attention for this next hour and a half. We'll be together. So we just ask that everyone tunes in and tunes out the distractions, i.e. putting your phone away, closing the extra browser so that we can all be present. This will be a very interactive presentation that Nadia will be giving. She will be engaging the audience, asking lots of questions. So we want everyone to be on the ball so we can all have an engaging experience. And lastly, take action. As just mentioned, it'll be an engaging experience, so we'd love to have your involvement and take action afterwards with the information that you will learn. And also, back to the tenet of respect, for those who do not comply, we will remove participants from the meeting to keep everyone feeling safe and respected. Okay, carrying on, a couple housekeeping norms we have is on confidentiality. With this topic, we may have people sharing their personal experiences that may be very personal to them. So we just ask that everyone is respectful and upkeeps confidentiality. And with that, please do not take screenshots to distribute or share on social media. Please stay muted when the speaker is speaking. Please keep your video on so that we can have an engaging experience. And this is a safe space. And we will maintain it as moderators. We will also be using Slido. So over to L.E.A.D to explain that.
So we will be using Slido to moderate the event. So towards the end of the session, there will be a Q&A with Nadia, and we ask that you send your questions through this platform. So if you search up on your phone or your computer, www.slido.com, it should take you to a page where you put a code, and in the code, you put ABR. So that's the code for the event. And once you're there, you're able to send your questions ahead, and we're able to see it, and Nadia is able to answer the questions as well. I'll put the code in the chat as well, so you're able to see it after.
Great, thank you, L.E.A.D. And now we will introduce our special guest speaker, Nadia Richards. L.E.A.D?
Yes. So Nadia Richards is our is the guest speaker for today's event. Nadia is the manager of anti-racism integration at George Brown College, where she works on various anti-racism projects and initiatives to incorporate anti-racism practices and pedagogy throughout the college. She's also a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Social Justice Education, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto. Her work focuses on the lives of African women, Africa and the African diaspora, and their lived experiences of resistance, resilience, empowerment, and liberation. Nadia's doctoral work explores African women's empowerment in Rwanda and investigates the realities and conceptualizations of women empowerment from the perspective of rural women and girls. Nadia lives in Toronto with her husband and 2 children. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with everyone and to discuss this important topic about racism in post-secondary, or the educational system to be exact. So I would just start off with my agenda. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So today I'm going to give an overview of racism, anti-Black racism, and an understanding of what anti-racism is. I will also share my personal story, and this includes my experience within the Canadian educational system. And I will talk about racism in education, as well as racism in post-secondary. My focus is on post-secondary, but there will be elements in which I touch on secondary school. And I also want to look at Black excellence and what that means, and how can that be actualized in post-secondary institutions. And at the end, we will have a question and answer segment. Next slide. So this is actually that was just my welcome. So welcome and thank you for being here for this discussion. And I really want to engage everyone in having a discussion around what racism really means, because I find that sometimes it is a generalized understanding that lacks the complexity of what it really is. So we will just take a look at the next slide. Thank you. And what is racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-racism? Now, will anyone be kind enough to share their definitions of what these things are? No? Okay, that's fine. We will have more opportunities to discuss this topic. So,
Nadia, we have
oh,
participants with their hand raised.
Okay.
Could you let us know how to pronounce your name, please? Participant with their hand raised.
Yeah, you can call me Ari.
Okay, Ari, thanks for being here. Would you like to answer Nadia's question?
Yeah, I can speak for racism. I know racism is discrimination against people because of their race and their culture.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with anti-Black racism. Like I have an idea, but I'm not sure which way it kind of goes.
Okay,
yeah.
But that's still good. You have an understanding of where this starts. Thank you for sharing that with us. Is there anyone else who would like to add to Ari's comment? No? Okay. So, oh, I hear someone.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm eager to kind of give a definition, but I'm also eager to hear what your definition is. But it's just that to me, this is rooted in it's just so rooted in so many different things. Kind of hard for me to give an exact definition because it's just rooted in so many different. Like I would sum it up in one word. I would say lens. Like you just have this lens that you see things. It's you know, you have to unlearn certain things based on the lens that you already perceive certain people.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's correct. If depending on the type of lens that you're using to analyze things and how you conceptualize things can have an implication. And so I will go into defining racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-racism. So L.E.A.D, you can. So when we talk about racism, we're speaking of a system in which was established many hundreds of years ago based on European nations colonizing non-European nations. And this is rooted in imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism. And this is where we see the construction of race. So it goes beyond 400 years. And the legacy of racism to present day is now the discrimination, the prejudice, the stereotypes that are connected to racialized bodies that send a message, an inaccurate message, that they are less worthy or inherently inferior. So that is the foundational pieces of racism. Now we see racism in interpersonal relationships, how individuals, what their behaviors are and attitudes. We can see racism in organizations through policies that are systemic. We can also see racism through cultural ideology. Pardon me? I'm sorry?
That was just a mistake. But we do have an hand raised actually from the
Oh,
audience.
Patricia.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I appreciate the foundational piece you just shared. And I wondered if another piece, in my lens anyway, was that it was driven by economics, right? So we were colonized, and imperialism was because of economics. So we were deemed, uh, um, we were used to build nations. We used to gain assets for white people. And so by demonizing us, and that's my word, then it allows it to live. So society continues to do what you're saying right now in terms of, but I just thought that the economic piece was and maybe you can help me with that if that's not the correct
No,
awareness you have.
absolutely. When I mention capitalism, that is where I'm going with the connection to economics. And you're correct. By virtue of exploiting these these non-European groups and exploiting them economically and dehumanizing them, demoralizing them, that is where the root of racism stems from. So you're absolutely correct. I think I was speaking to cultural ideology as well, that can also have roots of racism in it when we look at how knowledge is produced and how media is produced and how we understand concepts of beauty within the Western world. That is one way of looking at it. And systemically, I spoke to that, interpersonally. So these are different forms of racism that exist within our society. Now, when we look at anti-Black racism, one of the things Patricia said that's important is that it was based on economics and various, what I will say is various non-European nations were colonized, but the uniqueness with anti-Black racism is that it is also rooted in the enslavement of Black African bodies and the legacy of hatred that is connected to that. And that is what we see in present day educational systems that we can identify, where there are challenges with young people as early as junior kindergarten, and it goes straight to post-secondary, where there are issues of anti-Black racism. And today I'm going to also look at my own experience with that and what that looks like, as well as what it looks like to work towards anti-racism. So that's my third definition. And anti-racism is more than using anti-racist rhetoric, language. You find that many people are very versed with the language, so they're able to navigate certain systems and appear anti-racist. But it is more of an act of intentionality, an act in which individuals engage in anti-racist practice by challenging behaviors, practices, policies, systems that exploit, exclude, and demoralize racialized people. And in particular with anti-Black racism, it is a very significant and important struggle in the anti-racism fight because of those connections to enslavement and the connections with colonization and imperialism. So I will, so these three things before I move on to the next slide, I think it's important for us to get an understanding of these three definitions: racism, the history of it, that it is rooted in a complex system that was based on colonization, capitalism, economics, imperialism, and the exploitation of non-European bodies. And also to recognize that when we think of racism with regards to anti-Black racism, we also think of the colonization and the exploitation of the continent of Africa. That is also an important aspect of it, because the continent holds so many resources and was the prospects were very high, and the resources, both human and natural, made many European countries very rich. So it's very much ingrained in that practice of exploitation. So yes, and then anti-Black racism having an intentional action towards challenging and interrogating racist spaces, practices, and policies. So our next slide, please. So I have a question for everyone. Where does racism show up in our educational system? Yes, thank you, Patricia.
De-streaming.
Yes, and we're going to touch on that. Yeah.
Pushed out, meaning suspended.
Yep. The disciplinary actions that are extremely harsh for particularly Black students. Any other examples? I can't, I haven't seen it.
Someone in the chat, she said acceptances.
Excluding Black parents and students from decision-making tables. Yes, and making decisions for them, particularly when it comes to education. And for example, with the streaming system, many young students may have been pushed by their guidance counselors to select a certain stream. Patricia.
Yeah, I was going to go towards courses or programs that are not going to elevate them. So they're often sent to college and trade school rather than university and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll touch more on how that systemic form of racism, when it was developed and really perpetuating racist ideology. Anyone else would like to speak to that? Okay, that's fine. So we will touch on where that shows up more as I go further into this presentation. But I wanted to speak to my own experience, my personal narrative with regards to racism. And I start at a very young age. Now, this picture is me that you can see in the background. It's me with my uncle. And I was very happy, very joyful and excited as a child. When I started junior kindergarten, that is when things changed for me. That is when I realized that I was different. And that is when I faced my first experience that I remember of racism. And the way that this played out was that my mother had worked with the government in Trinidad. So we had lived there for a year. And then I came back in the January, it would have been in the winter of the JK year. So it was halfway into the year. So I had not been familiar with putting on my snowsuit. So of course, when it was my first day, my mother put me in my snowsuit. We had gone to school, and then I had to struggle to take my snowsuit off. And then when it was recess, I had to put it on again. Now, the teacher found it necessary to tell the children in the class to call me slowpoke as I tried and struggled to put on my snowsuit. And this was an experience that, for some, they may say, oh, that's, she was just being mean. But to me, this is the root of subtle racism, how it plays out in the classroom, how children are treated, how they're mistreated in the care of certain educators. So in this situation, my mother actually went to the school, and she went directly to that teacher and spoke to her about the inappropriateness of her telling me this, and telling the students to call me slowpoke. And she backed off, but the coldness and the disdain was still present with the engagement that I had with that teacher. And I remember that at this very young age of 4. So these are just a few examples. Like, this is just one example that I have where, as a child, I was treated in a way that was not appropriate, and it was definitely there was definitely a disregard for my personhood, and this was an opportunity for my teacher, who I deem was a racist, to use subtle measures to enforce that. So following that, I think it was such a bad experience that we ended up moving back to the Caribbean. And within that time, I think I would say that it was a very transformative time of my life, where I was valued, where the leaders looked like me, where I was around community, and I was able to strive. And I would spend 4 years there, and return at the age of 12. Now, in primary school, when I returned to Canada and returned to Toronto, I was fortunate enough to have a teacher that was very good, and was very accepting of me, and very encouraging, and that made a world of difference. Within the high school system, that is where I noticed there was a disconnect. There was a disconnect between teachers and students. There were no racialized students. Actually, sorry, not racialized students. There were no racialized staff, but there was an East Asian gym teacher. And I believe that at the end of my high school career, one Black male teacher had entered the school. So there was no real true representation of racialized, educators in my high school. And there was also no relevant education as well that connected with the students culturally. So high school, I would say, was a very, I wouldn't say I was fully engaged, but I will say that I did what I had to do to go to post-secondary and to go to university. One of the stories that I tell about high school is when it was time for me to actually attend university, I had to get a reference from one of my teachers. And my English teacher appeared to be very nice to me. I did well in English class. And when I presented my form to have him sign for my reference, he did not verbally express this, but he appeared to be very upset by the fact that I was actually going to university. I could tell this by the way he was engaging with me, and he still signed the form. But these are just a few things that can happen within the high school environment. I also remember doing an assignment and submitting it and having the teacher go, "You did this?" So these were the type of discouraging actions that happened. I had a friend who was accused of not doing his assignment because it was so well done. Things like this. So, you know, these are subtle ways and somewhat not so subtle, how disengagement can happen within the high school system. So I will say for post-secondary, my experience in my undergrad was one where I had absolutely no racialized professors until my later years, where I had Dr. Ronaldo Walcott as a professor. And I also had an African TA for my African studies course. But it took me until graduate school to actually engage in a dialogue with other racialized profs. And that, you know, that was a long road in which I traveled to have the opportunity to engage with a Black professor or educator. So I will say that that has been, it has been an interesting journey for me, in which I identify various examples of racism that occurred throughout my tenure, in terms of my time in elementary, secondary school, and post-secondary just having no representation or very few up until the end. Now, as a mother, I think that my experiences have informed the way in which I engage with education with my children, in terms of being very much available and very much there when it comes to my involvement with their education, as I am not comfortable in entrusting my children to a system that I feel can sometimes exhibit racist behaviors towards young people. And I will say, as an educator, I have seen it. I have seen it in the ways in which white students have treated me, microaggressions that happen within the classroom towards other racialized students. I have had racialized students speak to their experiences to me and speak to the feeling of exclusion and not belonging within the classroom. So these are just a few things to give us an example of what racism may look like in the classroom, and how it played out in my own life. I do believe that, you know, it is a constant struggle with regards to challenging racism in education. And it is not an easy one, especially in the primary years, in primary school, elementary school, but it is still a very much necessary action to take as educators or parents or even students, to be aware of these sorts of things that happen to other racialized peoples. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk a bit about, what does the research say about Black students and the educational system with regards to racism? And now, Patricia touched on this, the streaming system. And the streaming system was established in the 70s to guide or to streamline students into particular areas. So there's basic, often children who may have been cognitively delayed would go into basic. There was general that focused on college education. And there was advanced that meant that you were in a position to go to university. And this was used to streamline students and really impact their educational journey and their future prospects. Now I see Patricia, you have your hand up.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on the previous slide when you talked about
Yes.
your involvement with your children's school, because I think that's a very powerful area. You know, what gave you, obviously, when I listen to your story, I'd like to say thank you for sharing your story, because it really captures many things. And this is why I'm asking if you could expand on, as a parent, you obviously, because of your own experience, led you to a sense of awareness of what potentially can happen in the system. Having
Yes.
said that, being a racialized parent in our educational system, we're still somewhat disenfranchised in that we're still not seen as knowledgeable experts or whatever, you know, even of our own children. I wonder what strategies you used to work with your children's teacher to engage them so that it's taken in a positive way.
Yes. I think one of the main things that I have done, Patricia, has been to be there, to actually be present at every parent-teacher's interview, to be present in terms of the work that my kids are doing in school. Now I have two children, one is much older than the other. But when my son was younger, it was really important for me to actively engage in everything that he was doing in the educational system. And even while doing that, I still confronted challenges in terms of how he would have been perceived, in terms of trying to advocate for my son, depending on what the challenge was, and also advocating for the needs that he had as a racialized student. Now, I'm just stalling a bit because I'm remembering a story that I told the L.E.A.D organizers about. One of the things that has been useful to me, as you asked, you know, what positive strategy has been for me to be an active parent. Once, when I was employed with the city, I had someone come to me, and this story has stayed with me for, I think it must be about 20 years now. And this woman was of Caribbean, she was from the Caribbean. She was an immigrant to Canada, and her daughter was in either kindergarten or grade 1. And the teacher had said to her daughter that my dog eats better than you. Now, when I hear things like that, it shows me that even if we're present, there are other abuses that happen that aren't even things that we can conceptualize. So I believe that being an active parent and always being there to engage and being there to advocate has been one of the strongest tools that I could use. And that, in fact, that ability to be present sort of signals to the educators that may be problematic, that you are invested in your child's education and you're invested in their future. And by virtue of that, I found that in most cases, teachers would back off. But sorry, I gave that story. I wanted to tell that story to just amplify some of the challenges that parents face. And this mother had to, like, we worked together to think of a way that she could advocate for her child without going to that teacher. Now, in this particular instance, there was no tool that could be used to work with that teacher directly, because that was blatant racism and abuse of a child, and the dehumanization of a child to compare that child, that Black child, that little girl, to a dog. I think I just gave you like a mixed up response, but I was just kind of going back and forth with what I did and with how, you know, when engaging with that mother, my advice was to advocate for your child and the steps that were required to do so. So I hope I responded to your question correctly.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the 90s, we begin to see in the educational system, so we've had the streaming that's been happening for 20 years now, and there is an issue of disengagement. Students aren't engaged. There's a low retention rate. Students are dropping out of high school. Teachers have low expectations of students. So for example, when that teacher looked at my map and went, you did this, that's just an example. And I would have been one of those teens in the 90s. There's also a lack of Black educators to, I guess, work with the number of Black students, you know, to work through a system that is based on Eurocentric educational style, as well as Eurocentric content. So as time goes on, we continue to see the disengagement with students in schooling. And the physicality of that is interesting because the students are actually in the school, but there's a disengagement with the mind and a disengagement with the spirit. So they're not engaged in the curriculum. They're not engaged with their educators, and it increases the number of dropouts. And Patricia, you mentioned this, the pushing out of students, because there is no sense of belonging within educational systems. Both that sense of belonging is lacking in both elementary and secondary school. And then we also see the labeling of students with accommodations, or the labeling of students over disciplining, or policing of students, the hypervigilance of ensuring that Black students are not causing trouble within the school system. So those are some things that came up in the research that was done. And when we look at racism and Black students, and these are things that are currently being addressed in certain forums, but it is still an area of concern when we think of racism and we think of the educational system. So next slide, please. So racism in post-secondary school. There are acts of racism, there are the outcomes of racism, and then there's the impact of racism. So by the time students make it to the post-secondary level, racialized students, Black students, they have encountered, if not one, quite a few experiences with racism. If not them personally, they will know someone who has. So they have already been acclimatized to what a racist environment looks like and understands the challenges in which is placed in terms of navigating that system. So when we think of acts of racism, and next slide, thank you. The first one is the limited access to appropriate supports and services. Now, this can be having a direct line to certain supports. It could be financial aid, housing, as well as culturally appropriate counseling. This is a big one. So when students are having difficult times, how many racialized counselors or Black counselors are there within the post-secondary institution to assist and support Black students? So that having access to appropriate supports and services, that is one of the systemic acts of racism. So it's one in which one individual isn't inflicting. It's not as if John is doing this, but the system has been created in a way that it has limited the number of racialized bodies that can actually provide those supportive services to Black students. Next one, lack of representation, which goes in hand with the lack of limited access to appropriate supports and services. Now that one's a big one. Oh, I wasn't ready yet for culturally. Thank you. One of the issues that come up in post-secondary is that if there are Black or racialized faculty, oftentimes they're not full-time faculty. So they may come in and out, and there's a flow because it's precarious employment. And that in itself is another form of systemic racism that happens with regards to hiring processes within post-secondary institutions. And that lack of representation is also a way in which the lack of belonging is connected. When you don't, there's something I always say, when you don't see yourself in your learning or your learning journey, it's difficult to succeed. But when you see yourself in your learning, when you see your Black prof, when you see your Black dean, and you see the person who's doing IT, and you want to do that job, and these positions are represented within your educational space, it serves as a benefit for belonging and for feeling that you are in a position to succeed and that you're surrounded by people who, in fact, support your goals. And these are all indirect messages that are sent, but lack of representation has a serious implication to how one can learn and how they feel a sense of belonging in that learning environment. So the next point is lack of culturally responsive and relevant education. Now, in many cases, it has been, I've heard excuses that, I can't find anything on that topic that represents, racialized people or non-European people. It's hard to find those resources. I can't do it because I'm not a racialized person. These are all different reasons and excuses that come forth in terms of why there isn't culturally responsive and relevant education. And this is also an act of racism because learners are put in a position where they are not able to engage with the curriculum or the content. And it's amazing that, for example, when teaching a course that deals with, I taught a course that dealt with oppression, and the number of racialized students that I had in there, I had so many, because in some way, of course, oppression has been a part of the non-European experience, but it connected them to relevant education about their experiences. So you find that the lack of that cultural responsive and relevant education is is in fact a tool, a systemic tool, again, that can be seen as an act of racism. The next one. Microaggressions. So I think many people hear, the word microaggressions and understand it as, things that people say. So microaggressions are actually more complex than just slight remarks, but they're actually based on a belief that an individual is inferior, and it comes out in a verbal display, and it can be intentional, it can be unintentional, but the communication of it is in fact derogatory, and it is hostile. And it is also unpleasant psychologically. So one microaggression could be someone who is a newcomer to Canada, does a paper, and the teacher says, wow, your English is really good. I expected that, considering that English isn't your first language, you wouldn't be able to do this assignment. That's a microaggression. We also have within the microaggression body, there are micro assaults, the ones that we're used to hearing about that are explicit. These are the ones that are blatant forms of racism that can be communicated. Even I'm thinking of All Lives Matter, but it's more, I guess, what we will call old-fashioned racism with the bad words and the, in the US with the cross burning on someone's front yard, that type of assault. Now, we also have micro insults, and those are verbal remarks that convey rudeness, insensitivity about someone's racial heritage and their identity. So in that case, we can think of examples in which I had someone ask me this. I am of Jamaican ancestry. My father is Jamaican. And I had someone ask me, why is it that Jamaican people, and this was very much a misinformed question, why is it that Jamaican people are on assistance? That is a form of a micro insult. I have also been asked in my work, when I conducted my work in Rwanda, they asked about how it went, and I explained the experience. And this person remarked that, oh, they sound civilized there. So these are all different forms of microaggressions that can come out in a discussion with different people at different times. And it may even be people who are racialized. And that's where we start to look at possibly internalized racism, but today I'm actually not going to speak to that. And the last one is micro invalidations. When you speak to an experience and it's invalidated. When you express that, yes, this has happened to me, and it's like, oh, maybe he was having a bad day. That's a micro invalidation. When you go to someone and you explain the harm that you believe is happening within your school environment or within the workplace, anywhere, and it is considered, it's a small thing, and it's not given the real, the amount of attention that is required, and the harm is negated by the person saying that, it's not that big of a deal. So these are all under the umbrella of microaggressions. And these are things that happen within the post-secondary institution. And it also happens when students speak to their experiences to certain individuals. as well as I can say as faculty also, at a time when I would express my concerns, that there were moments where I experienced micro-invalidations. Next slide, please. And the last one, that really adultification, which is a phenomena of Black youth, often younger people who are not in post-secondary, but it can still happen in the way in which issues are conceptualized and how students can be treated, is a form where an individual is treated as they're older than they are. So for example, and this will be, you know, in primary school, a JK student misbehaving and the teacher saying, and this is a Black student, that they feel threatened. That's adultification. In post-secondary, this can also happen because our students are younger going into the universities and colleges, and they're 17-year-olds going in. And that is an actual experience that they have. Next slide. So when we think of the outcomes of racism, there is dehumanization. The feeling that your humanity has not been recognized, and the feeling that your humanity is not being upheld within the educational institution. Isolation and alienation, when you are having moments of not feeling that you belong. So for example, I've had many Black female students. I found that they came to me more often than Black male students, but coming to me and saying that they felt that, you know, they weren't a part of the dialogue within the classroom, or if they stood up and challenged things, being alienated within that space. So these are just a few outcomes of how racism plays a part. The lack of acknowledgement, and this is with their capabilities and capacities. When you have students that are very bright, yet they're not being engaged and their educators are not acknowledging the work in which they have done and the value of their work within the educational system. Next slide. The constant legitimization of experiences, that also happens. It happens to the point where students may shy away from actually having these issues of racism addressed because they do not want to have to legitimize their experience or try to have to legitimize their experience that they've had to get it addressed by human rights, for example. So that there is a certain amount of exhaustion that goes with having to constantly prove that the experience in which you've had has happened. And this goes hand in hand with micro invalidations. And the next slide, please. Not slide, point. Fear of reprisal. So one of the things that happens is the fear of retaliation by faculty, by fellow peers, if you complain. And that has been, I think, one of the largest barriers that I have identified in post-secondary when it comes to racism. That fear leads to not making a formal complaint. It leads to the individuals who are inflicting harm to not be held accountable. And it upholds the system that's in place, because that fear of reprisal prevents some work from happening with regards to dealing with the issue, but it's also reasonable, because when we think of educators, they all know each other. And it's quite possible that in a particular department, that could happen. So these are some of the negative outcomes that can happen with racism in post-secondary. Now, when we think of the impacts, they are long-term severe impacts. After years of experiencing a negative experience, I said that twice, it can have an impact on one's self-esteem, especially if they have experienced microaggressions, if they have experienced various forms of racism in the educational system, and they've made it to post-secondary and they're still having those experiences. It can be internalized and it can have a psychological impact, an emotional impact on how that individual feels. And that can actually go longer than their time in post-secondary. So these are things that currently need to be addressed within the post-secondary system in the ways in which we provide supports for Black students and how we provide safe and relevant supports to allow for the low self-esteem and issues like that to be mitigated. Next point. The physical and mental health challenges. Now, this is by virtue of, it's connected to if there's, let's say, low retention. So someone, and this is just to give an example, someone has gone through the post-secondary system. It's been a negative experience, so they decide to drop their program. They're not working at a level where they make a lot of money. They are struggling. There are socioeconomic barriers, and they have to manage with less funds, dealing with racism within, it can also be within the workplace that has an implication on the physical and mental health. This also happens in post-secondary, like that was just one little example, but with the constant feeling of experiencing racism within certain spaces can lead to those challenges. If you could go to the next slide. And this is, so I speak to socioeconomic barriers and I connect it with the low retention rate that is also connected to the impact of racism and how that impact does not allow Black students and other racialized students to fully reach their potential. And that impact has long-term implications with the socioeconomics. That in turn has implications to physical and mental health challenges. And the next point, please. This is where I speak to low retention rate in high school and post-secondary, not being able to strive in the way that you could. Sorry, Patricia?
Sorry, I was just going to ask you or just share with you. So I know you're talking about post-secondary, but I thought I should just share too that the issue around low self-esteem and even the mental health challenges, I can tell you, attest to the workplace right now, if you are one of maybe two racialized individuals in a predominantly white setting and you challenge information or share information to rebuttal what others may say, it's amazing to see the microaggressions come out. And it does impact you. You second guess yourself. You tend to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't say anything, just hold back. And I can tell you it's a real situation, even in the adult world. So I empathize with our students right now, but I'm telling you, it's alive and well in the work sector, especially if you are only 0.5 racialized person
Yes.
in a work setting.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. I think you make a good point because you connected to the workplace. So these behaviors are modeled not only in post-secondary, but it goes into the workforce as well. And that it almost validates that physical and mental health challenges are prominent and are very much a result of the impact of racism and dealing with that on a continual basis. Next point. Yeah, so I wanted to just put this quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world," Nelson Mandela. Now, as much as we have these challenges, and as much as I have touched on my own experiences, there is still resilience and excellence in the Black community with regards to addressing anti-Black racism. And we are a community that, and when I say we, I mean Black people of African descent. We are a community that's formed on resilience, resistance, and Black excellence. And I wanted to speak to that at the tail end of this, because although we experience many challenges, we have still been able to propel ourselves within educational systems, within the workplace, within different environments while dealing with racism. So I have a question here. And what does Black excellence mean to you? If anyone can speak to that, or you can write it in the chat. What does Black excellence mean to you? Okay, so we will go to the next slide and speak about that.
I can share if you want. I couldn't
Yes,
write as fast. To me, is being able to, first of all, be validated, seen for who you are, appreciated, and being able to be in your space, in your full self, to achieve what you strive to achieve for, to be honored for what you have achieved, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, your social location, your height, your weight, whatever it is that our society seems to put us in box to diminish what we are able to do. But as a racialized person, particularly, is to be able to be respected and honored without unconscious biases playing in the background about how we speak, how we look, what we say, and so forth. So,
thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. Anyone else before I move on? No, I don't think so. Okay, it's perseverance. Thank you, Ari. Perseverance. And these are the things that I think although I am speaking to the experiences of racism, that we need to hold on to and recognize. When we're speaking about anti-Black racism, we need to be reminded of our excellence because it's there. So Black excellence to me is someone being grounded in their identity. And what I mean by that is understanding who you are, where you come from, and taking pride in our identity. As a Black person, it's very important to understand that history. And we also need to recognize that we also have many social identities beyond our race that may include our gender, sexual orientation, various social identities that make us up as one whole person. So we also need to honor our intersectionality when we are grounded in our identity. And by doing so, you are providing yourself with the confidence to be able to navigate certain spaces, even hostile spaces that might be, riddled with racism. The next point is that you are not alone, that there is a strong Black community in Toronto, as well as other cities in this country, that have formed and reinforced the value systems that value us as individuals. And this has been established as a prime resource, I would say, for us to tap into, that we are valued and that we're not alone in this struggle of racism. And that brings me to another important aspect of community, and that community matters. Being a part of a community is important. Being a part of your post-secondary community is also important. And there are ways in which you can build community. Now, one example that I have, the college that I work at, there is a Black Student Success Network. And that Student Success Network has built community. And I would urge you, if you are in post-secondary or you plan on going to post-secondary, to reach out to such groups so you are part of a community that supports you and assists you in navigating the post-secondary environment. The next point is mentorship for success. It is important to also, to achieve Black excellence, to also push yourself out there and find mentors who are doing the work that you plan on doing, mentors that can help you develop, mentors that can allow you to explore different areas and expand your knowledge and grow in different ways. The next example I have is recommendations for institutional change. Now, this is from an actual document that was done by Neil Price at George Brown College in 2016. And it was called, or it is called, On the Path Forward. And this document focused on what are the recommended areas that need to be in place to allow for Black excellence within post-secondary institutions. And this included pilot project, mentorship programs, dedicated spaces for Black students, and that is actually there at the college, pre-college programs to support students in getting used to the college environment if they've been away from the educational system for a while, tailored financial support systems, customized accommodations for Black students, culturally relevant counseling, and hiring practices that allow for the right representation, Black representation in the college system. So these are just a few examples of how institutional change can happen and how it can support Black excellence. And the next point. Keeping your eyes on the prize. So in addition to being grounded in your identity, knowing that you're not alone, being a part of a community, knowing that there's a community there for you, knowing that there are mentors that will be out there, and also knowing that there are ways in which post-secondary institutions can create change. Do not lose sight of the goals that you have within the educational system although you may encounter racism. That is one of the things that I want to stress, is that although we all encounter racism and we have multiple experiences that we can use as examples, do not lose sight of what your prize will be when you end that educational journey and you graduate and complete what you chose to complete, because this is a way in which we can rupture the system of racism, is when we actually push ourselves and we create change through obtaining our education and penetrating areas that haven't been penetrated before. And this brings me to the question answer period. If there are any questions, comments, I would love to hear them.
I feel like I've dominated the airway, but since no one's speaking, I will say thank you. I appreciated all that you've shared with us. It's some of it I know already, but you brought a different lens to it with regards to the things we can put in place to support our students as they move forward to post-secondary and what they can ask for. You know, knowledge is power. So knowing what's available is important. It's kind of a roadmap for them, right? But also the mentorship piece is also a very big one. So maybe I should just share a little bit that I've just recently been seconded to School Mental Health Ontario, and it's an organization that provides support, literature, programs for all school boards in Ontario. And one of the areas we are focusing on for the first time is our Black students and how to increase Black excellence. So I was intrigued when I got the invitation because it's an area that we don't have a lot of information on, which as you're speaking about earlier. So this is timely, and it's actually quite inspiring to know that there are people like you, Nadia, out there doing what you're doing, because you know, you actually should be doing a road show because so many of our young people don't know about all of this. And I don't know how L.E.A.D can spread this more. Maybe you need to offer it more frequently, just because, you know, I have friends who wanted to come today, but again, conflicting agenda items. But it's a topic that's worth repeating over and over because, you know, how many years of building where we are, it's going to take many years to dismantle and reconstruct. So thank you for what you've done.
Patricia, thank you so much for your contribution to this discussion. And something that you said there that really stood out to me is mental health and the barriers of mental health, the discussion within the Black community, and how that is a very important area that requires attention. And I just want to thank you for honoring my story and the way in which I presented. There is a question in the chat, and this is from Kimani in terms of who were some of your mentors. So my main mentor, I say my main because she's been with me for such a long time, is my thesis supervisor, Dr. Njoki Wan. She was the first professor, Black female professor. I think she's the only Black female professor I have had when thinking about my education. And she is the one who allowed me to take a journey into understanding my own identity, understanding decolonization, and also looking closely at the lives of Black women and how we have made many changes throughout the centuries. So she's one of my mentors, my main mentor, I say, because she really supported me on my academic journey and making it through difficult times. Yeah. So thank you for that question.
We do have one question on the Slido.
Oh,
and
yes.
I'm just going to read it out loud. Are there any resources or people that students could reach out to about experiencing or witnessing acts of racism in their schools?
Yes. So if now I'm thinking of school as post-secondary, there should always be an office of human rights. For us, it's the Office of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Human Rights Services. But within other post-secondary institutions, it may have a different name. But within that office, you are often able to meet with an advisor who will listen to the situation that has happened, and then you can determine whether you would like to make a formal or an informal complaint. And I am just using the process that I know in place at my college, is that once you determine that you would like to make a formal complaint, then it goes forward and becomes a human rights complaint. And there's a reminder here. Reminder, any, oh, sorry, that was you, Olavid. Yes, so there should be an Office of Human Rights that you can go to and make a complaint. Now, if you feel that you are not comfortable making that complaint on your own, oftentimes you're able to take someone with you to, you know, support you while you make that complaint.
Nadia, would you be willing to could I make contact with you to find out a few more names that I could explore to help students? Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to pop your email in the chat, or yeah?
No, I can put that in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yes, to continue the discussion, please email me. I am open to having discussions around this topic and, you know, compiling resources that I can provide as support. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I just want, I see Valerie nodding a bit. I want to thank everyone here for listening, for allowing me to have this discussion with you. And thank you, Patricia, for your ongoing support through this discussion and in, you know, your encouragement in the dialogue. I appreciate that. And I really hope that this made a difference and will, you know, be of some use in the future.
It definitely will. It's very inspiring to know that there are folks out there in our universities and colleges. So I think you're pushing us forward with some a little more ammunition about how to have conversation and what to ask for. So that's empowering.
Thank you. And there are a few things in the chat. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to thank you as well. Thank you so very much, Nadia. We really appreciate you collaborating with the L.E.A.D org to bring this amazing event to all of us. And we just really appreciate the time that you gave. It was a really amazing presentation. And thank you to the audience for your active engagement and involvement. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight to tune in live and interact.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Nadia. That was amazing.
Thank you all. It was great to speak to you and share some knowledge.
Great. Lots more things coming through in the chat.
Yes.
Kamani says, thank you for being here and sharing your story. This is very informative and inspiring. And yes, really appreciate everyone coming. And we do have a YouTube channel, as mentioned earlier. So we will have our recording uploaded so you can share it with any of your connections you think could benefit. And we look forward to seeing you at the upcoming events. Speaking of which, I'm going to share my slide again to share our survey. So L.E.A.D, I'll have you speak about the survey.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. So I'm just also going to send a link to the chat. We would really appreciate your feedback. Your feedback is valuable to us because this is how we gauge the future workshops that we host at the L.E.A.D organization. It's just a 1-minute survey to ask how you like the event and any suggestions you might have. I'm going to send that on the chat as well.
Great, thank you, L.E.A.D, for sharing the link. I'll leave the QR code on the screen for just a moment in case anyone wants to capture the code to complete their survey. Okay, next we have upcoming events at the L.E.A.D org. So this fall, we are hosting a fall career camp. It is a 4-week intensive program for youth aged 20 to 30. Starting out by hosting an open house on Tuesday, September 21st from 6 to 7 o'clock. In this open house, you can find out more information about the career camp and see if this is something you'd like to participate in. And the camp itself will take place from October 4th to November 1st. We will have 2 workshops a week. So it's a pretty intensive camp. We're meeting for workshops twice a week from 6 to 8 p.m. We're doing evenings to help accommodate people's schedules. And we will also have the opportunity to do group coaching once a week in the form of office hours. Our camp this summer for high school students was a huge success, so we're bringing it back this fall, this time for older youths 20 to 30. We're also going to be featuring amazing guest speakers who are experts in their fields, including Zainab Kahira, who is a career success specialist, Sarah Anderson, and Janice Yee, who are also career coaches, and Elias Burney. Each of the coaches specialize in their topics of resumes and cover letters, personal branding, LinkedIn optimization, networking, and interview skills. So participants will have 8 workshops, with the very last workshop being a digital campfire / cumulative assignment presentation. Throughout the camp, participants will be taking deep dives into each of these topics so that they can understand what they have to offer, and through exploring and honing their values, skills, strengths, purpose, and personality, and creating their unique value propositions to ace their interview. So this camp will help you get prepared for getting into careers that are really in alignment with your unique skills and talents. And L.E.A.D?
Yes, you covered most of it already. I had sent the links to the chat if anyone is interested in signing up. The deadline to register is on the 30th. We would really appreciate if you can get your applications in time or share with your networks, anyone that might be interested.
Wonderful, thanks. And it's a totally free program, 4 weeks intensive. We had great testimonials from our last camp. Really big difference before and after. We were really able to hone your skills and talents so that you do walk away from the camp knowing more about yourself and able to present yourself to future employers. We're also having a special 2-part university/college panel event coming up very soon. So Thursday, September 23rd and 30th from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. Lemde, do you want to speak more about what participants can expect?
Yes. So in this university and college panel, the hope is to share experiences of current students or recent grads that went to the various colleges and schools in the GTA. So it's going to be a 2-part series with students from McMaster, U of T, Seneca College, York University, many other schools. They're going to share their experiences while also helping current high school students to, know what to expect in college, so they're not going in blind.
Great, thank you. So we'd love to have you there, or if you know any high school students or incoming university or college students, we would love to have them participate.
Yes.
Okay. And at the end of the month, on Wednesday, September 29th from 6 to 7:30, we have Zainab doing a special career development workshop for the general public called Do I Have to Quarantine My Career? How to Find a Job During Uncertain Times. So Zainab is a career coach and specializes in student success. And this will be beyond a workshop about job search. She will also talk about how to take care of the main thing, which is you, as you are job searching. And she'll talk about different things such as doing life checks. So I highly recommend attending Zainab's workshops. And Alamide?
Yes, thank you, Valerie. And we do have our social media accounts. We post updates on there regularly. If you could please follow us at CanLead.org on Instagram. On Twitter, it's _the_lead.org. And on YouTube, as Valerie mentioned, all our recordings of our past workshops are on there. And it's the Canadian Multicultural Lead Organization.